Now, turning to that parable from the Gospel of Luke, sometimes Jesus tells a parable, and people say, what is that? What does that even mean? Why did you tell us that? And then Jesus goes, okay, come over here, and then he tells the disciples, well, this means this, and this means this, and then they're like, oh, okay. Sometimes they don't even get it after he explains it. But there's something about what Jesus wanted to communicate this morning that was so important that Luke, he tells you what it means before the parable gets told. This is very unusual. Usually it's the parable plus a time of consideration and reflection, then an interpretation. It says, Jesus told them a parable about the importance of praying and not losing heart. So it's like, let me just tell you from the beginning, this is what it's about. Because one of the spiritual problems that many people have is they stop praying because they've lost heart. Now, actually, the Greek word that gets used here is heart failure. So think about that, spiritual heart failure. Like you think of all of the stuff we do to keep our hearts healthy. I know how many, I won't make you raise your hands, but people who have had angiograms, people who have stents, angioplasty, people who have had valve replacements, people who are on blood thinners, people who are on congestive heart failure remedies, all sorts of things, because we are very in tune that if the heart isn't healthy, the body isn't healthy. And in this case, God's not going to put you on statins. God's going to put you on prayer. And yet, because of the world in which we live and the difficulties of the world in which we live, it is a struggle not to lose heart. And so Jesus tells us this parable about a widow in a certain city, and it has a melodramatic effect. Because Jesus goes, there was once a judge who neither feared God nor feared people. And then when he shows up on stage, he goes, I don't fear God and I don't fear people. And it's like, all right, we get it. He's a godless judge. He's an unjust judge. And this is one of the reasons people lose heart, is they look at the world and say, what difference does my faith make? What difference does my prayer make? Look at the people we're dealing with. They don't care. They literally don't care. They have power, they have influence, and when someone like this lady shows up asking for justice, someone almost laughs in her face and goes, you don't realize that's not what we're about here. I've got a real estate scheme I'm working on, or I'm taking kickbacks to put people in prison, or whatever it is that the person is doing that is unjust. There is a corruption in the system. And Jesus doesn't say, like, well, now we're going to fix the system. Jesus says, I want to strengthen her heart because I'm still just and God is still good. And so do not lose focus because of evil or unjust people or unfaithful people. That's not the headline. The headline is God is still God. And so ground yourself in this reality and keep pursuing. Be persistent. There's something wonderful about spiritual persistence when it's also related to trusting God, even in a world where there are judges like this. And the judge doesn't grant justice because he says, and then one night he went to sleep and an angel showed up to him and he said, oh my gosh, what have I been doing this whole time? There is a God. The only reason he makes this is to get her out of his hair. He never changes. Sometimes the world feels like it doesn't change. Actually, he says, there's a wonderful little Greek word in here where he says, I don't want her to give me a black eye. It's the word for getting a black eye. Oh my gosh, she's gonna keep wrestling with me and I'm gonna end up with a black eye. So he goes, just get her out of my hair, then I can go back to doing what I've done. It's God even using the evil intentions of a person to accomplish something good. But that chemistry and that alchemy or that magic of God doing redemptive and delivering things, we don't understand it. We are not part of it. We are not included in it. We are the people who are simply meant to keep pursuing the good. In a world where there is injustice, in a world where people who have power entrusted to them have been corrupted, Jesus doesn't say, and now I'm going to transform him. God will handle him. He just says, don't let your heart fail in a world like this. And notice, she's a widow, which of course in the biblical world is one of the most vulnerable people you can be. So maybe in this case we could say, a homeless dude went to the court. Or we could say an Iranian refugee whose wheelchair ramp was just stolen. People that have no real legal protection or status that they can rely on. And she's being sued by someone. She's not the plaintiff, she's the defendant in this. She says, I need justice against my accuser. Vulnerable people who are being exploited in the system of justice. And yet she knows she can't afford a great lawyer, but she does have a good God. And so this is the world in which we are called to continue praying and to have strong hearts, not to experience heart failure. Now, of course, it's not really fair to say that, because it's like telling anyone who has a physical illness or physical heart failure, well, have a stronger heart. And they're like, well, yeah, I would like that, thank you very much. And so what are we to do with this? And what are we to do with the struggle that is our life? This is why we have someone like Jacob. This very famous story. Jacob is an interesting case because, like many of the biblical patriarchs, he's not that great of a person. He's not very heroic. He's conniving, he's deceptive, he and his mother are conspiring against his father and his brother. Even when he goes to confront his brother for the first time in years, he sends everybody from his family in front because he's afraid his brother's going to massacre them. So it's like, go ahead, guys, you go first. Oh, thanks, Dad. Nope, go ahead, honey, you go too. It's like, oh, how thoughtful. No, he's sending you just to try and stave off potential violence from his brother. Even in this moment where he's grown so many years past that, he's still living in kind of that spirit of self-preservation and a little bit of deception. But he's someone who made a big mistake when he was young. And he's been living with that mistake, and he's been struggling with that mistake. And it's a mistake he made in his family, and he wondered if it was something they can get over. And then he ends up wrestling with this night creature, and we don't know if is it an angel, is it a stand-in for God, is it God? There's someone that he's wrestling with on a whole nother horizon. But he doesn't lose heart. It doesn't mean that he's a good person. It doesn't mean that he did the right thing. He really messed up his family by what he did in many ways. And then he was abused by his uncle, who also messed him up when he was trying to get his wife, if you remember the story of Laban and the 2 wives of Jacob. All of that stuff is true. But what's also true is that God shows up and wrestles with him, and he gets a new name. He doesn't lose heart, and in not losing his heart, he gets a new name. His name is changed from Jacob to Israel. And then Israel means he struggles. That's what's so interesting about our faith and our religion, is at the key moment of revelation, we realize that at the heart of what we're doing is struggling. And I don't know if you've ever felt that, where you just go, why is this such a struggle? My prayer life is a struggle. My family life can be a struggle. My and you go, can we just have everything be okay at one time? Can everything just be okay at one time? And not. This wrestling is happening constantly. And what we need to realize is Jacob has a past. His family is complicated. Yours might be too. But Jacob also has a future that God is determining. Jacob has a direction that God is setting. And in the same way that this widow is coming up against sort of a brick wall, there's a path that God is making into a future for her and for Jacob and for us that is a future God has imagined. And you'll notice that Jacob has to go to that very same encounter he was planning to go after a night of struggle and wrestling and finally blessing in a new name, but he does it with a hip dislocation. So when he comes limping across the river the next day, people are like, dude, what happened to you? You look awful. Well, it was a long night last night, and I didn't sleep, and I wrestled someone. What? There was no one left. Well, I think it was God. He limps into this future with a new vulnerability. And this is part of the substance of the widow's experience and our experience too, that walking into God's future will require not more defense, but more vulnerability, to live with an open heart, because soft-heartedness is key to heart health, spiritual heart health, including not succumbing to heart failure. But it's still not quite enough. Like last night, my wife and I, we were coming back from an event they did for Estancia High School. They opened a new theater, and it was a lovely dedication of this new theater, and they were paying tribute to the prior drama teachers. And so we even left, like normally we'll stay and maybe dance, or, I do have to protect my reputation in the community, so I don't want to dance too much, but we were driving home, and we say, oh, how nice, an early night, really. And then the phone rings, and it's the police department. And they say, oh, a man's just died, and we need a chaplain to go out. So I went out to this guy's house, and he had passed away. His son had found him. And talking to the family, it was a very complicated family, like most families. There was alcohol abuse, there was divorces, there was mental stuff. I mean, but it was not uncommon. It would have been like a very common experience for so many people. But one of the things the wife said was just how long we all struggled. For decades, we were all wrestling with his problems, with our problems. And from the outside, you probably wouldn't even know that much from their family. But from the inside, this was all they were wrestling with last night. And so what did we do? We prayed. Actually, we were at this event last night, and my wife sees one of the catering staff, and she goes, "Oh my gosh, look who it is." I had no recognition. My mind is going, I have to fill it with sermons. I can't recognize people's faces. And she goes, "That's the server from when we took the Japanese out to the side door at 5 Crowns. When Pastor Totten was here, we took 2 people out to the side door." She said, "That was our server." And I went, "It was?" And then she goes, "Do you remember us?" And she goes, "Oh, I do, of course." And then we go, "How are you doing?" And she goes, "Well, I don't want to bring it down." And I go, "Oh, you can bring it down. We always bring it down, And she said, "Well," she's literally holding a plate of chicken wontons. And she says, "Well, my nephew, a member of our family, maybe it was a nephew-in-law, he was a police officer who was killed in Texas. And our whole family, I've had to quit my job, and we've had to adjust." Then she goes, "I'm just so sorry that, this is..." And we go, No, we asked. And then we said, "What's his name?" She said his name was Jacob. And we said, "We'll say a prayer." She goes, "Oh, I would love it if you would say a prayer." And I go, "Let's say a prayer right now." So we're standing on the balcony of Costa Mesa Country Club. She's holding a plate of chicken wontons. And we say a prayer. And we say a prayer for her family. And we say a prayer for this young man who lost his life. And she's crying over her wontons. And then she goes, "I have to go back to work." She says, I have a job. And I go, "I know, sorry about that." But it was the recognition of someone and giving them space to express the struggle, and then surrounding that struggle with prayer. This soft-heartedness where we are willing to approach each other, create space for each other, allow people to tell the truth about their lives, then surrounding it with prayer. This is what Jesus means by don't lose heart. And what I saw last night with this family I was with, which isn't the Jacob story and which isn't the story of the widow, is what happens if we die before we get that justice. Or what happens if we die before we get that reconciliation that Jacob wanted with Esau, and it just ends with a loose end. So much of life ends that way. We don't get what we prayed for, or we don't get what we asked for. Jesus himself dies on the cross, murdered on the cross, and there's no rescue. There's no, "All right, time out, everyone. Well, we went as far as we're going to go." God goes to that place on the cross for every person whose prayers were not answered in time, but whom God will deliver in the kingdom of God beyond time to redeem those loose ends. This is why our church isn't just called Church of Prayerful Perseverance. It's called Church of Resurrection. Because the reason we can say we won't lose heart is God has given us a new heart. It's not just, "Come on, everybody, have a stronger heart." The idea is God has renewed your heart through the gift of baptism, through the sacrament of grace. God has given you a new heart, the heart of resurrection. And so do not succumb to spiritual hard-heartedness. Do not succumb to heart failure, because that's not who we are anymore. And this is the gift God has called us to. So whether we're Jacob trying to figure out what to do with our family, whether we're someone like the widow trying to navigate the justice system, whether you're just a person trying to figure out how to live in the world and not cry on your chicken wontons, the gift is the same, a new heart from the risen Christ, a voice of prayer that is strong, trusting that that prayer will never be in vain. Do not lose heart. God hears every word, holds them, and will answer them, even if it's after death. Amen.